So what is it that? So this is what we saw.
Let me tell you something.
So bye y'all. Yes, Earth and friends. Welcome back for another day, another dollar. Okay, Candace Clark, also known as Kandeaux the Farm Plug, checking in from Chicago.
This is Camper K, Caleb Peterson, KP, out here in the great state of Texas, where it's getting a little cold this weekend.
It's snowing right now in Chicago, so
Ooh.
right. So for
Y'all-
some people, welcome to the actual cold weather, and for others, welcome to the beginning of your fake winter. Right. Welcome to Farm Plug TV, where we're here to educate, thrive, and connect. So, as always, let's kick it off with some news. So I do have two news. I do have some news articles. At first, I thought I didn't, but I do. So for one, they are considering, with Joe Biden being the president now, they are considering having Tom Vilsack, who was the USDA Secretary of Agriculture under Obama. They want to have him back again. He has been nominated, or they're having conversations around nominating him. And that is just extremely problematic for a lot of reasons. So some people are like, well, cool, and they're cool with it because he was under OBZ, under Obama. But other people are like, no, player, you weren't doing what you were supposed to do. And in a lot of cases, a lot of people aren't aware, but the closest that we've ever kind of come to reparations is when a group of Black farmers filed a class action lawsuit against the United States Department of Agriculture and won. So that was called the Pigford claim. So it's Pigford versus the United States Department of Agriculture. But in a recent article, they were doing research around how the USDA has been claiming to get more young people of color into farming, and how a lot of the racist practices that they had been involved in, the discriminatory practices that they were practicing for like the past 50 years, really since the inception of the USDA, that they had been curbing it and things like that, and that the discrimination was going down. But there was an article that came out last year pretty much blowing that that announcement to shit, right? It was a bunch of myths. It was a lot of lies that the USDA were basing those, I guess, progressive claims on. And so the fact is that they had never properly addressed or took proper note of the civil rights discriminatory claims to even know, to be able to properly measure how they had been doing to respond to them. So the fact that they never really came up with a plan to measure how their strategy was impacting small farmers just lets you know that it wasn't really something that was on the top of their agenda. And the propaganda and the communication that they put out is totally misleading versus what they were actually doing. So they were intentionally lying about the work that they were doing to get more people of color involved in agriculture. And Vilsack was the secretary while all of this was going on. So I know, Kayla, a couple of weeks ago, you also mentioned that for his climate change committee, he also picked someone who was highly questionable. So Biden, in terms, I would just say for the environmental space and for the agriculture space, I don't know how promising it's going to look for small to mid-sized agriculturalists. And then in lieu of that energy, just really wanted to highlight the farmers in India right now who are on about, I believe it's day 20 of their protest. So they actually just had a hunger strike from 8 a.m. on Monday, and it ended at 5 p.m. on yesterday. So for those who don't know, there are a bunch of farmers in India right now who are protesting because of the regulations around India's agriculture sector that are pretty much making the farmers pay huge prices, to the point where a lot of them, farmer suicide in India has been up, and it keeps rising because of the debts. And so they are reaching their breaking point, and that's really why they're on strike. So I'm trying to reach out to somebody over there to see if we can interview someone or get some information from them to get a voice from on the ground over there as to what's actually going on. But those are the two stories that I have. Kayla, like on the news, they were like, back to you, Kayla.
Sorry, due to technical difficulties, I had a bit delay there. But it's great to hear from you, Kandeaux, the farm plague. I'm calling in from Texas. We have little to no news here in Texas. We were preparing for this episode mentally and spiritually, so the news has escaped us this week. But there's some stuff in Texas happening with water. Water is always a big issue. One thing was a Supreme Court case between Texas and New Mexico over a water dispute issue, and they sided with New Mexico, so Texas lost that dispute. So I know there's going to be some farmers that are upset with
What
regards.
is the dispute? Do you know more about what it is?
So I'm pretty sure it's regarding water rights and the right to what's called downstream versus upstream water right, and who the water belongs to along the Pecos River that ends in Texas. So I think they were disputing of what quantity of water belongs to New Mexico versus Texas, and how much that water should be allowed to flow to Texas versus dammed up and safe for New Mexico users. And we have a good amount of farmers in the Pecos River Valley in Texas who do cantaloupes, and also we have some corn and wheat in that region as well. Let me see.
Cool. And I see Sharman just put some things in here. I did see that article about the 3 richest people in the United States pretty much are positioned so that they won't have to pay any taxes. So we are, COVID is still going on, but we're seeing all these other things go on in terms of the economic state of our country right now, which I think is so perfect for our conversation today. And we talk about baby, cause hey, we on baby. What Boosie say? What he say? Wait, damn, I was on.
What Boosie say?
Boosie said, I pull up to the club, gas tank on E, but all drinks on me. Wipe me down. Wipe me down. Hey. Yeah.
Hey. Yes.
Yeah. So E is for environmental economics.
Yeah. So I had to do a little mental preparation for this episode. I had to take myself back to grad school, back where Kandeaux and I first met in the classroom, debating people, asking those hard questions. So this episode will be a great way to talk about those really complicated issues that surround economics, but we're gonna simplify them. We're gonna do a little bit of layman's talk. We're gonna break it down so you can understand why the environment is important and why the economics of the environment is important. So Kandeaux, you got something to share over there? What you got?
Yeah, I saw Charmin, and this is so perfect in lieu of our conversation. She just put in Forbes magazine. Is this Forbes? No, Business Insider. Water futures are set to join the likes of gold and oil and to be traded on Wall Street for the first time ever. So this is a perfect opportunity for us. And we're going to talk about why stuff like water and common goods that everyone has access to, what separates, what is environmental economics? Why is water, people who don't even know what futures are, right? When we talk about trading natural resources on Wall Street, it's called futures because you can't determine it now. You got to determine the price in the future. So they set a price for it today, and that's the price that it is in the future, no matter what the value of that product goes to. So for water to actually be placed on Wall Street, what is that? That just kind of blew my whole mind. Kayla, so both, I feel like this is going to be interwoven through the conversation this evening, but I guess our first question is, what is environmental economics, right? Is that our first question?
Yeah, that is our first question. Yeah, let's come back to that question, because that's such the topic of water being traded on the market. It's a huge news, but it's also can be controversial, definitely amongst the environmental community. So I feel like, that's a topic we can weave back in when we get a little bit deeper. So, when we talk about environmental economics, we know what the environment is and we know what economics is. So in simple terms, is trying to place value on the environment. And what is environment? The environment is water. The environment is clean air. The environment is trees, greenery, recreational space, fisheries, Um, any other examples you got, Kando? I know sometimes in urban areas, the environment can look different versus with me here in Texas. But what is environment to you, and how do you see, values being placed on the environment around you?
Definitely. So when I think about the word environment, I think of living and non-living factors that make up what surrounds you, right? So your environment, I immediately go to your senses, right? The five senses. What do you see, smell, hear, taste, and feel? And these things consist of your environment, right? So, like you said, in an urban space in like Chicago, our environment, I think about skyscrapers. I think about we still have gardens, right? We still have farms where we were just talking about the whole first 10 minutes of this conversation. So, but the environment is not just limited to nature, if that makes sense. And so the environment quite literally is everything that surrounds you at any given time, no matter where you are, right? And as a as a human, right, I feel like I'm a part of my environment and I engage with my environment. So the same way like we inhale oxygen, exhale CO2, and then trees inhale CO2 and exhale oxygen, there is a relationship between me and the environment, me and my environment. And so I think that environmental economics is attempting to quantify or put a number to what that relationship looks like between humans and nature, or humans being in nature, or that's a whole nother conversation. But yes, between that relationship.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned skyscrapers or buildings because, at first I didn't think about that, but I feel like I was thinking about it a little bit more as you were talking, but I'm like, there's so many different ways that these buildings can affect your quality of environment, whether good or bad, whether it's shelter or it can be a negative shelter where it blocks the sun, where, there's so many big building a skyscraper, you don't see the sun for a couple streets, or even, there is the idea of placing value on open space, like having an open field, and so if you're in an area where there's all buildings, and that's the environment you're placed in 24/7, from 0 to 45 or 0 to 12, that can affect your environment and your relationship with the
Yeah,
environment.
and it's interesting too. Another piece of news that I just came to my mind is Joe Biden was talking about land conservation and how he's vowing to give millions of dollars to land conservation and what that looks like. So Darian, for example, if you were someone to buy a whole bunch of land somewhere, pretty much there are programs, within the USDA where you would literally be paid to not farm a certain percentage of your land, and that would be considered conservation. So like owning land, is so many benefits to owning land, and to owning pieces of your environment, and how that trickles down to the commute, like to that economic piece. You know what I'm saying? Like quite literally, there are advantages, like tax breaks, all of these different privileges really that you get from owning land, and that if you don't own land, and even some people who do own land aren't even aware of what that, and it has real life economic translation.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that value of land can change depending on its quality, depending on who is determining the value of the land, depending on if it's an heir's property and if it has a proper title associated with it or not. And so I feel like that's another topic, we'll talk about, is how this economics of the environment is somewhat shifty. Like there's not a, straight and strict term of how we determine what has value and what doesn't have value, and who gets the benefit of that value.
But something else that came to my mind too, Kayla, is I remember in this environmental economics course that one time we were looking at a home, right, and thinking about your environment in an urban space, right? So when you're, say for example, you're about to buy a home, right, and you look at one home in the hood and one home in the suburbs, right? Why does one home cost more versus the other home, right? And there is a economic equation that factors in the environment, right? It takes into account how much green space is around your home, the quality of air in your home, the quality of water that reaches your home, the quality of the pipes that carry water to your home. All of these things are factored into the cost of your house. So when we start, again, when we think about our environment and how environmental economics plays a role in your life, no matter if you're in an urban space or in a rural space, the environment and the quality of your environment has a very, very real effect on your economic situation every single day. So if anyone was wondering why that's important, that's why environmental economics matters, right? Because it quite literally is talking about why supply and demand. So we think about economics, let's like even take out the environmental piece first. Economics quite basically is looking at the laws of supply and demand, right? What do we have available and who wants what we have available? And so typically there's a relationship between supply and demand where when supply goes down, the demand goes up. And when the demand goes down, or no, when the supply is high, the demand goes down because you flood the market, right? But the environment doesn't really work that way. So, okay, I'm gonna toss it back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great way to kind of go into our second question, which is, why is the economics of the environment different? Like, why do we treat, trees or treat water, fresh air differently than, your cell phone that you buy? Or what do you say?
Gold or oil.
Gold, oil.
Oil is technically,
Yeah, yeah.
and gold, but
Yeah, those are resources too. Yeah, yeah. True, but those can be commodified and placed a value on. Whereas something like fresh air, like Candace just said, it does and can directly impact the value of your house if you live in an area that's polluted versus even if it's not in the hood. If you had two houses that were exactly the same, they had the exact same distance from a school district, they had the exact same 3-bedroom, 2-bath, with a view, all that stuff. But one house had poor air quality than the other. The one with the better air quality is going to be valued or evaluated at a higher price because it's worth more. Because having access to that air quality is valuable. But at the same time, no one directly pays for that. No one is directly creating fresh air. The trees are, but we're not paying the trees to produce that. So because no one's paying that service, there's this lack of ownership that isn't associated with free goods, what we call public goods. That's one of our trigger words. One of our definitions for this episode is a public good. So like fresh air, trees, open spaces, a lot of these are public goods, so no one's directly paying for them. And since no one's paying for them, it's really easy for them to be depleted. Like, if you're not going to pay for, if you have that friend, if we all have that friend that we give them a ride everywhere and we let them eat at their house and they ain't paying for it. The first time it's cool, the second time is cool, but we keep doing that, and that friend knows that they don't have to come out of pocket. And since they know that they don't have to come out of pocket, they're not going to be very resourceful or very protective of your time, of your gas money, of the food that you put in your house. So it's the same way. If you're not actively feeling the cost of this item, of this value of the environment, you're less likely to try to protect it, to try to preserve it. And that's what we've done to the sea, the ocean. No one's really paying for clean water in the ocean, but now it's all plastic in there because no one's really bearing that weight. So that's one way you can kind of say how environmental goods are different from some of the other goods we see commodified. I don't know if there's any other definitions or anything else you want to outline in that kind of basic.
yeah, I mean, it's just like clean air. You know what I'm saying? Like we all have to breathe it. You know what I'm saying? Everyone has to breathe the air. You know what I'm saying? Until you start getting in the chambers where, gas mags, the future, people sell, like in China, they already sell bags of air on the internet. So, that's why water being able to be traded on the stock market, this raises different types of alarms. You know what I'm saying? Like, even when you start thinking about different types of water, spring versus distilled versus alkaline, all of these things, the reality is really you just need water, homie. I'm gonna be real with you, clean, potable drinking water. And alkaline is definitely better, when you start getting into those type of degrees of health for your body. But ultimately, like, you need, there are basic things that you need to survive, and a lot of those things that you need to survive tend to be communal goods, right? There are things that like even the whole, like, land. Let's take a beach for example. Nobody really technically has the right to own a beach, right, in the United States, unless they own a beach, right? So it gets fine print. But in a lot of cases, so for example, national parks, right? A lot of times you have to pay to get into a national park. It may be like just $2 or something like that to help cover the maintenance and the upkeep and the employees and people that work there. But for the most part, the National Park Service is severely under budgeted and they are lacking a lot. But I know the Indiana Dunes, for example, right next door in Illinois, is like you can see like people live around the dunes, but nobody lives like on the dune, like the actual dune that is like historic and biodiverse and things. Nobody lives on it, but everyone has access to it. And the government, the National Park Service, is there as a regulatory body. See what I'm saying? To help manage and maintain and to keep that perception that Kayla touched on, like, oh, well, if it's free, I don't really have to care. If no one's monitoring it, then I can do whatever I want. I can litter however I want because no one really is holding me accountable. And so that's when you get different institutions that are set up and regulatory bodies and stuff. But
Yeah.
bringing it back though, so we had kind of touched on like supply and demand, right? So when you talk about cell phones, right, you can produce a cell phone, you know, the iPhone is something new, supply is low, the demand is up, it's something new, right? Things like that. But what about, Kayla? I mean, so this is, I'm trying to say the definition without saying the definition, but market failures is pretty much what I'm going to, right? And market failures are presented is like, what happens when that equation of supply and demand does not pan out in the regular way that it typically does with other non-natural resource oriented items, right? And so the environment is really one of the few cases where supply and demand, that equation don't matter, because it don't matter how much water you got. People need water to survive. So no matter what the supply is, the demand is always going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the main distinctions when you talk about the environment, the economics of the environment, is that's where you get these market failures and you get situations where, you know, the supply and demand doesn't level out. It never gets to that equilibrium or that, you know, high level of efficiency that allows you to continue to produce, because that's what capitalism rests on, this idea of continual production, and that no matter what, the market will solve the issue and it will find the perfect price for the environment, the perfect price for pollution, the perfect price for water. But that doesn't happen with the environment, and it produces what we call externalities. So that's another one of our keywords for the episodes. Is it sounds, or it is exactly what it sounds. It's an externality. So it is outside of the equation, like the equation that Candace was saying, that the valuable resource of water or fresh air, that's a big one. Because when we talk about fresh air, what we're really talking about is climate change, you know, because it is the pollution, it's the carbon dioxide, it's the CO2 and greenhouse methane. That's what I was trying to think of. Methane, the greenhouse gases, that is what's causing climate change and global warming and severe weather patterns. All these things that we're seeing now and we're feeling the effects of, that is result of extreme amount of pollution. And the people who are doing the polluting aren't paying for that pollution. No one's paying for that pollution. They're creating a product that no one's paying for. And since no one's paying for this product, pollution, greenhouse gases, and it's existing, and it's outside of this market. And so since it's outside of this market, no one's regulating it and no one's bearing the price and the cost of that. And without bearing the cost of that, no one's going to curb it. No one's going to actually put in the resources, the investments to fight it to the extent and the pace that it's needed to be fought.
Exactly. So let's take let's use an example, right? So COVID-19, right? We know that poor air quality leads to a higher chance of you having upper respiratory issues, right? If you are having more upper respiratory issues, you are then at a higher risk of COVID-19. How do we put a price on the pollution that has now made you and your family more susceptible to COVID-19? How do we put a price on if you and your family get COVID-19, right? The damage, if you lose a loved one, right? And now you see what I'm saying? How do we put a price on your health care, right? On your insurance? How do we put a price on these things that you may have to pay for in the future as well, right? So these are externalities, again, that have very real effects on people in their lives. They do end up costing us money in the long run, but how much does it cost to mitigate those long-term costs, right? How much does it cost to not pollute as much or to pollute extra, right? Who bears the brunt of this cost if we pollute so much and now more people are sick, right? Where do these things fall? So these are externalities. We know they exist. And then whose job is it to pay these externalities, right?
And I love that you brought up that point, because it reminded me of what we realized in our program, in our class, that when you actually do the work, whether it's pencil work, whether it's regression analysis, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to tell you the exact processes that you take, but when you do those processes, you find out that in the long run, the investment in protecting the environment, providing clean air, those preventions of medical expensive death, all these things that you prevent, the benefits outweigh the cost, but it's in such a long-term investment. It's over 10 years or over 15 years. And since we're such an instant gratification type society, that we can't actually look at those benefits 10 years down the road and be like, oh, that's worth investing in, $10 million to prevent pollution today, And that's one of the biggest things that really irked me. What I learned is that over time, this is going to be the biggest benefit for the well-being of our society, at large.
Of the earth, nigga, not even
the earth,
society, of the environment,
yes,
nigga,
yes,
earth,
yes.
nigga, earth.
You, me, the plants, the trees, all of it, everybody.
I'm telling you, me and my brother, we got that joke. International Space Station is like, yo, we down here arguing over police kicking our ass, and then it's an illusion on Earth, like China and the United States don't fuck with each other, but they definitely are in this thing called the International Space Station, living together, running tests, figuring out how to get humans to live full time in Earth. So if people beefing on Earth, but in outer space, they cold chilling, what does that mean for Earth, nigga? And where is you finna be, nigga? See, these are the questions we got to ask y'all. This is why I be tweaking out, because it's like, okay, now we're entered this thing, like 2020 marks the beginning of what they call in the decade of action. And so I'm gonna be talking about this a lot, because the decade of action is pretty much the 10 years that we have to get our actions, our behaviors of polluting and contributing to climate change under control before there's nothing we can do, and climate change becomes this inevitable thing that is going to fuck up everybody's coexistence on Earth, right? So then the question is like, well, damn, G, if we know, like, this is the decade of action, bro. We got 10 years left to make some real fucking changes. Let's just stop doing everything, Kayla. Why we don't just stop polluting? Why don't we just say, fuck it? Climate change is here. Let's stop this shit.
That is a great transition to our third question. That was literally our third question. Why don't we just stop polluting? Like, why isn't it that simple? If we know that we only have 10 years, we know that the investments over the long run is beneficial to human life, animal life, and the earth writ large. And we know that people today are dying and being hurt and being harmed, having asthma, significant impacts of these the pollution. Why don't we stop? Like, what is preventing us from stopping? And I mean, at the end of the day, it's money.
I'm about to say, Charmin, Darian, why we don't just stop polluting?
Yeah, y'all got ideas? Y'all know?
We don't just stop. Like, we know climate change is real.
I literally had to tell somebody who took a bag of garbage. Like, how people have garbage in their car, like in plastic bags and stuff? And he was about to put it on the street, like just sit it on the street. And I'm like, what are you doing? It's a whole garbage can on the block, like on the end of the block. Why don't you just put it in the garbage can? He like, for what? It's trash out here already. And I'm like, that's the problem, because people like you taking whole garbage out your car, just throwing it on the ground, and it's a whole garbage can right there. Like, just put it in the garbage can. Like, that be blowing me. That be blowing me though. Like some things you can, like some things are preventable. Like I can see if it was trash that literally, like for example, as we know, CTA, right? They're not as frequent. Maybe they are now, but before they're not as frequent with cleaning the garbage cans. So sometimes the garbage cans overflow and like, stuff will blow off. So if that happens, that's understandable. If trash blows off a overfilled garbage can, that makes sense why it's on the ground. But if you as a person are about to go into a building, say you're about to go into Walmart or wherever you're about to go, that from your car to a garbage can or from your home to a garbage can, there's no reason why you're throwing trash on the ground. I just never understood that concept. I just always felt like that's trifling. Like, just period, that's trifling. At some point, you're about to cross a garbage can. You could just throw that away.
That throwing garbage out the car, that's like one of the most frustrating things to me. At one, I just watched the woman like toss. Like I couldn't believe it was that much trash in her car. First off, but two, I'm just like, man, you go to the gas station how much? Like it's a garbage can at
Exactly.
every
That's what
pump.
I'm saying.
You know what I
Yo,
mean?
it's like these excuses are over. Like, come on, bro.
Nah, it's
It's
just
at
I'll
least
stuff
a
stuff it in your
Walgreens
pocket till you
garbage
get
can.
somewhere.
Some.
Yeah. Nah, people. I think like we as people, just really undervalue and underappreciate like just those simple things. You know what I'm saying? Air, clean water. Like we don't have to see pollution right in our face. You know what I mean? Like you go home, you're not thinking about pollution because it's not something you got to see. And then once you throw trash out, or once you got this 8-cylinder truck that's just eating up all this gas and polluting the air, like you don't have to look directly at the negative effects of that kind of stuff. And until you make a choice to actually like look at it. But it's just
Now,
for a
see,
lot of people, it's
here's a
not even on
question
their
though.
radar.
But see, is it not on? So let's ask that question though. Is it really not on their radar? Right? We was just talking about like air quality. You know what I'm saying? So like when black people, when your auntie or your cousin or something be like, damn, I got asthma. And everybody in your family that lived in your great grandma's house that been in the same spot for the last 50, 60 years, and everybody that grew up in that house got the same asthma. You see what I'm saying? And you see, like, is that not people saying that they're, like that's our way of recognizing environmental things happening? Like we know that the air that we breathing is kind of different. You feel me? But it's like, we may not say it directly. And I get what you all are saying. Like it's definitely frustrating. But my thing is that, especially when we talking about climate change, like one person people throwing trash out their car, don't get me wrong, it definitely contributes to the problem, but it ain't doing half of the damage of the Coca-Cola factory and whatever they releasing into the Mississippi River on metric tons per day. You see what I'm saying? So like there's a corporate structure that's polluting the earth on a corporate scale, and then you have like the individual attitudes of everyday people that are bearing the brunt of corporate decisions and their own personal decisions, but maybe, like you said, are not having the conversation in that way in their brain. So it's like, whose job is it, or whose responsibility does it really fall on? Is it more of the corporations, or is it us as individual actors? Like, what would y'all?
Well,
You know what? Just being real. When I be seeing some people's stories, I'm like, you know what? It makes sense why the street dirty. Cause whole time some people houses be fucked up. Like, bruh, you don't even got a damn sheet on your bed. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I'm sorry, maybe that's the privilege in me. Maybe I just, but some things I feel like if you legit did not have it, like you don't have, you know what I'm saying, the means for something, that's okay. That makes sense. But if you actually have the means to have a home, have a space where you're covered, where you have water, where you have toilet, you know what I'm saying? Like we went camping, you know, at Mama Muja's or whatever, right? We were outside where we had to shower outside, right? And some people couldn't even handle that. Like, they was like, I can't handle doing this. I got to shower inside. I can't do the outside showers. But there's people that actually live like that every day, where they have limited water, they have limited bathroom, you know what I mean? And they still keep their environment cleaner than people that have actual buildings to go to. So to me, I feel like it's just a privilege in us sometimes, that when you've never experienced being homeless and like legit not having nowhere to go, I don't think you'll ever understand how important it is to just keep shit clean. Like I've been in a situation where I've had to sleep on people's couches, you know what I'm saying? So I've actually experienced homelessness and actually experienced going to a fucking federal building and them telling me you don't look homeless just because I wasn't quote unquote dirty and stinky.
I
Like
mean,
I feel like that's a state of
I
man.
definitely feel you. Like there is definitely, I'm not trying to not hold people accountable. You feel me? Like at the end of the day, you're responsible for your community. You're responsible for your healing. You're responsible for your community. You're responsible for yourself, for your family, people you care about. Like that is a reflection of you, you know? But I do think that it is important that, and I'm working to be more mindful of this as well, you know, like how I look at, you know, people in the community. I have to remind myself, especially like Darian, after doing Grounds for Peace, you know what I'm saying, and going to these communities with all these vacant lots, and having conversations with these people, right, on the south and the west side of Chicago. And when I was talking to them, it was like an element of, well, I'm renting this house. I don't really own this house. So this ain't even really my community in a certain type of way. I'm just passing through. And so when that exists, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's layers of social conditioning onto why people look at their environment and the community in the way that they do.
I
And
definitely agree with that.
I
I
think that
definitely agree
social
with that.
conditioning comes from the lack of social responsibility that we put on the corporations.
I
You see
agree,
what I'm saying? So
definitely.
it's like if we don't, like, even think about plastic bottles, G, like it's ways, if you go to other countries, like even in Africa, they use glass bottles. Like majority of people, they have a recycling system where they use glass bottles. Why are we the most free country, the most democratic, the most technologically empowered, one of the most free, all we ahead in all of these places, but when it comes down to plastic bottles and littering and plastic bags, we just cannot, you know what I'm saying, for some reason make that shift. Even looking at wearing a mask, you know what I'm saying, wearing a mask can save people. This thing could have been over, but people don't want to do that because people care more about their own personal vices and personal virtues, because we live in a society that, hey y'all, because we live in a society that caters the individual over the communal, right? But that doesn't, I don't think that we should blame the individual for that. I think we need to blame the corporate and the society that makes that environment conducive and okay for that type of behavior to go on.
I
You know,
think the plastic thing is more of a controlling the lifespan though, because it's been proven that plastic, you know, over time holds a lot of contaminated like bacteria after a while versus glass. So I think it's just one of the many methods of America trying to kill us low key. Like because the American lifespan has improved obviously because of our medical system. I feel like they're finding other strategic ways that obviously we're not conscious about. Like we don't think, oh, if I drink this bottle of water I'm gonna die, you know, we don't think like that. So I think that could be a part of the overall agenda, right? The overall agenda of, just like you said, with climate change and all these other things happening. I feel like it's an overall agenda to control a population in a sense.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, we have to mention the money. I mentioned that before, but money it's not a passive thing. It's not like, oh, well, this is our culture. This is what we allow. You always, for every situation, I feel like you have to turn around and look, who could possibly be making money off of this? And when you start counting the people who are making money off of polluting of the earth, whether you want to talk about plastic bottles, and when we talk about plastic bottles, that's not just one company. That's Coca-Cola, but then what is plastic bottles made out of? That's petroleum. So that's the oil industry. So once you start looking back and looking at all the different feelers that are connected and how many people are getting paid, like if people die in the process, they're probably like, yeah, okay, people will die. But I don't think their goal is to kill us, because if they kill us all, who's going to buy their water bottles? Their goal is to make money and continuously make profit. And that's what capitalism is. That's the model of capitalism. It's continual growth, it's continual process, and it's at the burden or at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the workers, and the expense of the consumers, all three. So what you got to say, Darren? And I know you want to hop in.
I do just a little bit, cause I mean, if you think like this country built on motherfuckers basically saying like, hey, we can do whatever the fuck it is that we want to do. We don't have to consider anything. You know what I mean? We are God's people, to say. You know what I mean? Like, so we can do whatever the fuck it is. We don't have to consider the environment. The environment should consider us. You know what I mean? Like, we walk around like with that type of ego. In this country, like that's what it's based on. Like everybody argue about, what the fuck you gonna tell me I can't do this? That's all it is. And so like, and it's all usually self-centered and individualism, and not just understanding like the community. And a lot of people, myself included, just at a point you don't understand your connection to Earth. You don't understand your connection to this planet. Like, you know, it's not taught to you in a certain type of way. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of taught to have like this tunnel vision, and we are taught to be, you know, just kind of focus on your own priorities and not really understanding how all of our individual priorities are aligned in some type of form. And so, like, not understanding that, you know, we got to move in a way that allows us to succeed as a race. And so people not looking at it that way. Most people just looking at it as like, oh, you just want to tell me that I need to live long and be clean. It's like, well, no, this planet that you live on, you're supposed to love it the same way you would love your home, the same way you love your bed or like your couch. Like, it's way more important than that stuff because it provided all that. So it's just a different, my personal opinion, it's just a different way that we gotta like begin to like look at these things, because you know what I mean, it's important that you take care of the things that take care of you.
Definitely. One time for the masculine energy that's aware, because a lot of niggas don't be knowing. So how much pollution should be produced then, right? Because I think ultimately it's like I think Kayla, you touched on it earlier. It's a convenience culture. You know what I'm saying? So it's in that individualism that you touched on, Darian. It comes down to, this is convenient for me right now, so it doesn't matter what this does to generations in the future. It doesn't matter what this does to my kids, because I won't be there to see it. I want this bottle right now, so I could just use this plastic and throw it, and it'll be that. But like, should we put a cap on that? Like, how do we decide how much pollution should be produced?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a hard question. And I guess for me, the spectrum lies on, of course, I'm not even gonna allow the spectrum to incorporate the super capitalistic overproduction. We're gonna produce until we can keep producing. But there are people who lie on that spectrum, and their solution to climate change is technology and technological advancement. So there's some people who believe that we can stay on the exact same track that we're on today. We just need to create, you know, satellite type technology that we shoot up into the sky, and then it captures carbon and it emits the right levels of chemicals to combat this, which I am not on board with. But some people do say that could be an option.
I ain't gonna lie, it blew my mind when look, y'all, we had a teacher, and this nigga was talking about shooting rockets into the sky to create fake clouds that would help break down the carbon that's in the sky and the atmosphere, y'all. And they are doing so, like, you know, when people be like, chemtrails, like, that shit ain't no joke. Like, it's really people out here running tests on pretty much how to that's pretty much controlling the weather, bro.
Yeah,
I ain't gonna say it's controlling the weather, but it's definitely creating clouds and controlling the weather. So it's manipulating things. So I definitely am a proponent of technology is not gonna solve all of our problems, right? So we cannot just continue to do business as usual because like that's the earth is telling us we can't do that. And my stepmom believes that sustainable capitalism is a thing. I'm not gonna call her out and pull her into this conversation just because she just walked in or anything, but I'm just saying that it's not a real thing and it's not possible. It's not a thing.
Yeah, I'm not a big proponent of that. And then, of course, the super on the other spectrum is the idealistic of like, we're just going to stop polluting now and it'll be fine, or we can all just be, little nature freaks and hold hands. And I wish that could be true. I wish life were that easy. And some parts of me just wants to be in nature and eat, the garden's goods and be naked, but you can't do that. So I feel like there's definitely an in-between. And I kind of look back to, when we're in economics, I think our teacher actually, drew a line on the board that represented the amount of, pollution that our earth could sustain. So there, to a certain extent, there's, I guess, environmental equations one could do. But I guess my simple answer is the right amount of pollution is the amount where no one's being harmed. And that might be super idealistic as well, to be honest, because at the end of the day, definitely American society, just like Darren was saying, if you think about how this country was built on slavery. So, how do you imagine America that is run in a way that there isn't one population that's being marginalized and being taken advantage of, whether it's low-class workers, whether it's,
I wouldn't even just say slavery. I would say exploitation because
well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Not even the exploitation of human bodies, right? Of people. They exploited human bodies to exploit the earth. So it was exploitation to exploit and continue to exploit and to create an infrastructure where that exploitation can be pretty much supported, right? Because really when you think about slavery was nothing but a giant subsidy, right? A subsidy is anything that is like an umbrella. You see what I'm saying? That's what it was. It was free labor. When you get free labor, that is something that you don't have to pay for, which brings your overall cost down. It subsidizes to bring down the cost of. Slavery was a subsidy. So now when you look at the Farm Bill, right, which is rooted in slavery, right? You cannot talk about agriculture in the United States. You can't talk about any natural. You can't talk about anything in the United States really without talking about slavery. So even when we mentioned earlier that water is about to be traded on Wall Street, where Black bodies were traded on Wall Street, it's exploitation, and it's happening in different ways, and it's getting more creative. And now you have people, especially Black people, who are involved in capitalism who are supporting this exploitation. So it's definitely been more tricky. So this question of how do we, hold on, what was the question? How do we achieve that level of the ideal, because I agree with you. I think the level should be where nobody's being harmed. You feel me? Like at a very foundational level.
Well, your comment just now made me want to edit what I said, because I want nobody to be harmed, but also to highlight that the earth isn't being harmed. The earth isn't being exploited, because like you said, if you look at our farm system today, we are exploiting the earth. We're exploiting the soil. We're doing monocropping. We're, literally pillaging the soil every year, ravaging it. So even though if we found a way that no person or animal is being harmed, that way of farming is still harmful to our environment. So I feel like we need to have both people in mind, but also the environment, like you mentioned.
Damn, G, this is a really powerful discourse. So I feel like essentially what we're asking is, what does society without exploitation look like?
And it's hard because where are there examples? Like, what examples do we have to look to? Maybe some historical ones, but I don't have that many that come actively to mind. The only one.
Go ahead.
The only thing I've seen recently that's given me hope, and it's gotten some attention, you probably know more about it, but just some of the Gullah Geechee people in the Georgia area. Of course, I know a lot of land has been taken advantage of and has been reaped for nice resorts along the beach. But I have seen some short videos of some of those people who've been able to maintain property and to, live communally. But
I mean, wow. So I would say the Gullah Geechee is a prime example of all the things we just talked about. So if the Gullah Geechee is really direct descendants. The culture that exists on that coast where the Gullah Geechee, which is a pretty much like an indigenous group of people who are direct descendants of slaves, and through their language can trace where they actually came from in Africa, for people who may not know. And so earlier we talked about tragedy of the commons, right? Common goods. And a lot of the area where the Gullah Geechee live that makes up their community is coastal and could be considered a common, right? It was a common for the longest time for their community and for the people who would come through and engage with their community. But like you said, now resorts are starting to come and buy up that property. So it's like, and then they're buying up prime real estate areas. So then it becomes the question of how common is our commons, you know what I'm saying? And then, once all of these developments begin to happen, then you get tourism that comes, and then tourism, kind of degrades the environment as well, because you get more cars and you get more people that's probably going to litter and all these things. So the natural beauty of the space begins to decline because tourism comes in. But I mean, I don't know. I think that, I don't know. I think that's the question for real. What does a society without exploitation looks like? And I think that is the challenge really of our generation, is to figure out, like, and I think technology can be really influential in this fight for a non-oppressive, non-exploitive way of living. But I just feel like that over dependency on technology, right? It was that one movie, In Time, with Justin Timberlake, when time was the new currency and people was paying each other by giving each other time. And like, yeah, I'm kind of high right now, I ain't gonna lie, so my brain is bouncing on some real
well, I mean, honestly, if you think about that movie, if you want to, because I like that movie, but if you think about the whole premise of it, or the whole antagonist, what was he doing? He was hoarding money. He had millions of years locked up in a safe